What you wanna know?
What's going on, y'all? Did you miss me? It's Myke C-Town here with another episode of What Do You Want to Know, where you ask your questions. If I like your questions, I answer your questions on camera. Real quick, what you're listening to in the background is a new record from a dear friend of mine, Scott Stapleton. This is his band, Virgin Forest. And the song is from the new album, VF3, which I think is easily one of the best albums I've heard in years. And I would not be saying that just because he's my homie. Like, for real, I think this record is absolutely phenomenal. But I'm going to put the Bandcamp link in the description box down there. Go listen to it. Fall in love with it. Boy, the shit is tight. So yeah, I got a couple questions that I'm going to answer. And let's get started. Alright? First question. Katana Style said, "Hey Myke, I just want to know if you had your father in your life, because I didn't. I mean, I know him and he's still alive, but he wasn't there. All I had was my mom." Females. "I'm 23, and even though it didn't bother me when I was younger, it's really starting to hit me now. I've realized how effeminate of a man I've become, and I want to change, but I'm afraid I've grown too accustomed to how I was raised. I guess what I'm asking is how to be a man if you've never had a good example of one." Wow. Okay. Well, yeah, to answer your question, no, my father wasn't really in my life. He was around here and there, but for the most part, I grew up with my mom and my sister. My father wasn't a great guy. He was an abusive, womanizing alcoholic. I won't get into the ins and outs of his ins and outs, but the only thing I really got from him was his twisted, fucked up sense of humor and his taste for the bottle. But most of my other traits, luckily, I got from the women in my household, which is really cool because my sister is awesome. She's an awesome chick who works her ass off for everything she wants in life. She busts her ass and gets it. Well, I don't know. Maybe I didn't really take that much from my sister, but she's still an inspiration. My mom worked multiple jobs just to keep us fed and clothed when we were younger. She's really big on education and trying her hardest to be a good person. Maybe I didn't really take that much from her either, but I try to, at least. But I don't know, I couldn't think of better women to take life tips from. I also have a brother, but we were never close and don't really speak much, so male influence for me was pretty much nil. So I think for the most part, we're in the same boat, me and you. As far as how to be a man, if you've never had a good example of one, let me ask you something, man. Do you have a dick? If the answer to that is yes, then you're a man. Okay? When you say you want to change, is this really you that wants to change for you? Or do you want to change for some people who think that something's wrong with you because you don't act like a stereotypical man? Listen, dude. Playing football doesn't make you a man. Okay? Drinking lots of beer and eating lots of the meats, that does not make you a man. Fucking tons of chicks, none of that shit makes you a man. Okay? As far as being effeminate, again, does this bother you on a personal level, or does it bother you that others are pushing their idea of gender roles onto you? You know, if I had to guess, I'd say it was probably the latter. Look, I don't know how to help you with this, man. I'm not even remotely the most masculine man out there. I don't think being traditionally masculine is something that you can learn at the age of 23. And definitely not at the age of 36. But being traditionally and stereotypically masculine has been shown to be primarily nurture and not nature. So you can't help the way you were reared, man. Maybe you should just be happy with the way you are. I mean, is it causing actual issues with you in life? If not, fuck it. The best part about growing up in a house full of women is I feel like you get a better understanding of how women are. You know, I think a lot of the issues that we have gender-wise, as far as connecting on a mental and physiological level, is because we simply don't try to understand each other. You know, especially if we haven't had much experience with the other sex. So we try to force each other into these like predetermined roles and get frustrated when we begin to find out that those roles aren't tailor-made for every single person. You know, but what growing up around primarily women does is it also instills a more solid sense of respect for the female gender. You know, you stop thinking of women as simply women, you start thinking of them as people because you have no other choice but to communicate with them on multiple levels. When you have nothing but your mom in the household, the whole idea of, you know, would you want someone to treat your sister or your mom that way becomes way more real. But listen, man, you know, do your loved ones take you as you are? If so, then who gives a shit about reinforcing stupid gender roles? I can't even begin to help you with this, and to be honest, I wouldn't even want to put a video out that's pushing this idea like someone should even be concerned with this. I believe wholeheartedly in being yourself by any means necessary. And if that results in an effeminate male, then so fucking what, dude? So fucking what? The male population can do with a little bit of feminization. It's my opinion that the average male has way too much testosterone anyway. What's wrong with adding some extra emotion into certain things? From kids, we're taught that girls should play with dolls and dudes should play with action figures. And I'll be goddamned if I push out a message that this type of mentality should stick with us until adulthood. One reason I am glad that you sent me this question is it opens up the dialogue about gender norms and gender norms within males. We hear a lot about gender roles when it comes to women in advertising and media in general, but we don't hear a lot about men. And me talking about this in no way, shape, or form is a means of diverting attention away from the media's portrayal of women and how they should be. But I just want to talk about men for just a minute. We're also portrayed in certain ways that are not always becoming of all men. We're told we're supposed to be strong, we're supposed to be suave and smooth, and we're supposed to like certain things and not like other things. And when we break away from these things, we're looked at by other men as immediately lesser than. And while it may not seem like that big of a deal to most people, these gender roles, which are completely society created and enforced, they can be just as damning to men as they can be for women, for those of us that choose not to follow them. So, I don't know, man. Wrapping up, do you have respect for yourself? Do you have respect for other people? And very importantly, do you have respect for women? If you've answered yes to all three of those questions, then I think you're a perfectly fine example of a man. Alright? Next question. Yanai Almalam said, "Hey Myke, you excited for Fashion Week? Lol. More importantly though, I have a more serious question. I have this sort of weird hunch that a small section of the independent music scene is really, racist. I'm not starting to just call the scene racist or anything like that at all, because independent music is a huge scene and all, but here's what's bothering me. I have always been a huge Velvet Underground fan, and Nico is basically a Nazi. Eric Clapton is known for saying racist remarks, Johnny Ramone was a Nazi, and several other highly influential people are known for being just flat out racist. Morrissey, for example. Other times, I just notice how little diversity there is in independent music. I would go as far as to say that I am scared of it, but I try to only focus on the music. Are my suspicions valid, or shall I chillax?" Okay, so I think this is an example of simply going off face value of something rather than really looking into it, to be honest. Okay, yeah, Nico had some weird politics. She supposedly stabbed that mixed lady in the eye with a piece of glass while she was yelling, "I hate black people." She made a lot of other off-color comments, no pun, but she also dated Lou Reed, who's Jewish. And I also read that she was interested in Bob Dylan, who's also Jewish. So is she racist? Who knows? I mean, it's likely, but does that mean that everyone that likes Velvet Underground is racist? No. Eric Clapton also made the comments about supporting the anti-immigration prime minister. I believe he also yelled something about keeping England white. But man, those comments were made in 1976. A lot of shit can change in the course of 40 years. Even though I've never seen him actually give a formal apology for these things. Now, Johnny Ramone, where are you getting that he's a Nazi? The only thing I ever saw concerning Johnny Ramone and Nazism was that he liked to collect Nazi memorabilia. But that doesn't make you a Nazi yourself, man. Maybe he just finds that time period and those people fascinating. I do too. I wouldn't want to own any of the memorabilia, but that's just me. But you're probably also talking about the whole thing about him carrying a KKK member card, and the whole thing about like when he stole Joey Ramone's woman. Joey Ramone then wrote the song "The KKK Stole My Baby Away." All this stuff is rumors. We don't know if it's fact. Dee Dee Ramone was also into Nazi imagery. He had a fucking Hitler mustache and wore Nazi armbands, but they were also a punk band. And a lot of punk bands back in the day flirted with Nazi imagery. I guess just to like shock people in some juvenile, stupid, silly kind of way. Sid Vicious did it. Roz Williams did it. I don't think that shit was to be taken seriously, man. I think it was just meant to piss people off who weren't in the know. Lastly, you mentioned Morrissey. And this one I think is entirely unfair, and I'm a bit bothered by the fact that you're actually buying into this BS. You know, the only proof I've heard of Morrissey being racist was he said reggae's vile, which means he just doesn't fucking like reggae. It doesn't have anything to do with black people. You know, he also made the comment about the Chinese being a subspecies due to their treatment of animals. I'm going to sound like a stan, but I don't think he meant that in a racist way, because I think he would say that about anybody that supported animal abuse. I think that was just a heat-of-the-moment comment that he probably instantly regretted saying. You know, then you have the National Front disco lyrics, which if anyone is still claiming those to be racist, then you have to be some kind of idiot who can't understand the art of storytelling. You know, Morrissey is far from racist. You know, these claims are simply trumped up bullshit to get clicks on websites, and he's repeatedly refuted these claims of racism. The thing is, dude, rock was once very provocative. You know, other rock stars have said some fucked up comments. You know, David Bowie, Axl Rose. You know, I don't agree with it, but it is what it is, right? But you're scared of independent music. I'm sorry, but that's just a bit silly. You know, there's plenty of racial and cultural diversity in independent music. First off, the indie scene is huge. To claim that a faction of it is racist is just a bit silly. Especially when all the artists you name don't really share anything in common outside of the skin color. I mean, do I really have to go through the trouble of naming all the indie bands I can think of with minorities in them? Because I'm not going to do that. You can ask Google, and Google will be happy to give you plenty of band names. But dude, you're scared of a scene for no reason at all. You have a couple of examples of a couple people who are idiots within the scene. Big deal. Name me any genre or subculture that doesn't have a couple idiots in it. You know, if white people turned away from hip-hop because of, like, they were afraid of a few racial superiority sentiments from a few rappers, where would rap be today? You know, it would be impossible to nail down exactly which subset within indie music harbors racist feelings, because I don't think there is a specific subset. It's just that you have certain people in certain bands in certain parts of certain scenes that happen to be dumbasses. You know, the indie scene encompasses so many different styles of music with so many different bands. It's just impossible to nail the fucked up ones down. So basically you have two options, okay? One option is to practice the whole idea of separating the art from the artist. Meaning, regardless of who made this particular piece of work, it's still an amazing piece of art. Since the greatness of art is and should be up to the person that's witnessing it, then the feelings and the ideas of the creator can, in some cases, be completely discounted. You may have a painting created by Hitler. You know, Hitler to many was a horrible person, but that holds no bearing on the greatness of the painting itself. Okay? Your other option is you filter through all the music that you come across. The music created by people who you feel harbor deplorable politics, don't listen to it. I respect this method of thinking, but I can't really fully practice it because I find so many things in life to be offensive that if I had to cut out all of the music that I think is made by shitty people, I'd have to cut out probably 65% of my collection. So the catch with this is, where exactly does it end? At the end of the day, you're going to have to decide for yourself, listen and experience art for art's sake, or let your morals run wild and cut out everything you take offense with. Good luck. So that's it for this edition of What Do You Want to Know? As usual, please send me questions. You can put them on my YouTube discussion board. You can send them to my Tumblr, or you can send them to me on Twitter by hashtagging WDYWK. As usual, thank you for living, thank you for loving, thank you for being you, and I will see you guys next time. Aight? Peace, bitches.